From oil refinery shutdowns in Russia to high-stakes peace talks in Alaska, the world is holding its breath. A Ukrainian drone strike forces the Saratov oil plant offline, sending fuel pieces soaring across Russia. The EU draws a red line for peace, full ceasefire before any deal. And now Trump and Putin are set to meet on the US military base in Alaska, with the White House calling it a listening exercise. But that's not all. Global markers could be rocked as Trump's new tariffs on China collide with the escalating Russia-Belarus spot. What's really at stake? Who stands to gain and who will pay the price? This is Ukraine Today. I'm Zaroslava Kolesnikova and I'm here to break it all down for you. A major Russia oil refinery in Saratov has halted crude intake after a Ukrainian drone strike, Bloomberg reports. Since early August, multiple refineries across Russia have been hit, pushing gasoline prices sharply higher. How big is the damage, and can Moscow keep its fuel industry running under constant attack?
The Russian government is preparing an emergency meeting with representatives of the largest oil companies due to the crisis in the fuel market, Russian media reported, citing sources. They will discuss how to prevent retail gasoline prices from rising above the rate of inflation. Since the beginning of the year, AI-92 gasoline in the Federation has increased in price by a third and AI-95 by almost half. A meeting with the participation of Deputy Prime Minister Novak is scheduled for August 14th.
According to Rosstat, for the second week in a row, the increase in gasoline prices at gas stations has exceeded the overall inflation rate. In addition, the meeting participants will discuss the operation of the gasoline export ban mechanism and put forward proposals for its further application, and a report in the Russian media.
The spike in gasoline prices is caused by a decline in fuel production, and the reason for that is drone strikes on the oil refining facilities of the aggressor country, such as the Ukrainian drone attack on the Saratov Oil Refinery on the night of August 10th. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed that the facility was hit.
As a result of the UAV strike, explosions and a fire were recorded on the premises of the facility. The Saratov Oil Refinery is one of the key fuel infrastructure facilities of the Russian Federation involved in supplying petroleum products to the occupying forces. Its annual processing capacity is 7 million tons of oil. And here is the statement from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook.
According to Bloomberg, after the UAV attack, the Saratov Oil Refinery stopped receiving oil. Experts believe that a prolonged shutdown could significantly affect domestic gasoline supplies. Earlier, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed that the Afipsky oil refinery in the Krasnodar region was hit. Its annual processing volume is only slightly less than that of the Saratov refinery, over 6 million tons. In August, the Ryazan and Novokuybishevsk oil refineries were also affected by UAV attacks from the Ukrainian Defense Forces.
When the first strikes began, well, they were stretching nets, setting up some machine guns around the refinery. And as it turns out, none of this works. In other words, all these billion-dollar investments by oil giants in refinery security turned out to be worthless. This isn't just some hangar or even a workshop. This is a huge area. Sometimes the territory of a refinery is like a whole city. You can't cover a city with a net, so the only options here are either to accept and endure rising prices and gasoline shortages, or to actually solve the problem by somehow putting an end to this whole story with aggression.
On August 10th, drones attacked an oil refinery in Ukhta, almost 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The Kremlin understands that it cannot protect its strategic facilities across the entire territory of Russia. That's why they started talking about a possible so-called air truce, analysts say. This proposal was voiced by the Belarusian dictator. But the idea belongs to Putin.
Putin needs to take some kind of step to propose some kind of solution, or else be left without gasoline, without fuel. Fuel is the lifeblood of the economy. Accordingly, he has a choice, either to make some incredible efforts to move forces to protect the oil refineries, to pull air defense from the front, or, to pour billions of rubles into some new technologies. It was definitely Putin's idea, not Lukashenko's, regarding the air truce, because for Putin, this is the scariest thing.
Meanwhile, while gasoline prices are rising in Russia, the price of oil on the world markets is going down. Reuters reported a 4% drop in global fuel prices. OPEC Plus countries are increasing production. The Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service has reported that the Kremlin is preparing for oil prices to fall to $40 per barrel, which is almost $30 less than what was planned in the aggressor country's budget for 2025. Andriy Dimitrenko for Freedom TV channel.
At the word away the high-stakes Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska, the European Union has made its stance crystal clear. A just peace is only possible for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity are fully respected. EU leaders insist that any talks about ending the war can only begin after Russia completely halts its military operations. The message to Moscow: no territorial concessions, no half measures.
Ahead of President Trump's meeting with Putin in Alaska, the European Union has stated its position. A just peace is only possible if the principles of independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine are upheld. EU leaders are convinced that peace talks are only possible after a complete cessation of hostilities. The statement published on the European Council's website says that the European Union, in coordination with the US and other partners, will continue its political, financial, economic, humanitarian, military and diplomatic support for Ukraine, and that sanctions pressure on Russia will only intensify. The people of Ukraine must have the right to freely determine their own future. The path to peace in Ukraine cannot be determined without Ukraine's participation. Meaningful negotiations can only take place under conditions of a ceasefire or a reduction in hostilities. Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine has broader consequences for European and international security. We share the conviction that a diplomatic solution must protect the vital security interests of both Ukraine and Europe, reads the statement from the leaders of the European Union on the European Council's website. Putin may try to mislead the US president, according to officials in Brussels. The Russian dictator can break any agreement, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski is convinced. In an interview with the BBC, he emphasized, "The only reason for the war is Russian imperialism. Therefore, it is not Ukraine that should make concessions, but solely the aggressor, Russia. We all want peace, but it must be a just peace, and to achieve a just peace, we must secure concessions from Russia. Russia must limit its military objectives." Radoslaw Sikorski, Polish Foreign Minister, in an interview with the BBC. The head of the Polish government, Donald Tusk, is convinced that Russia's war against Ukraine must not benefit the aggressor. The American side promised that before the meeting in Alaska, it would consult with its European partners regarding its position. For Poland, for our European partners, and, I hope, for all of NATO, it should be obvious that national borders cannot be changed by force, and therefore Russia's war with Ukraine must not benefit the aggressor. The head of Denmark's foreign ministry warned, agreements with Putin could turn out to be a deal with the devil. It would be very, very sad if suddenly someone, ignoring Ukraine and Europe, started drawing new borders on some map. We must avoid this at all costs. And that is precisely why Europe is applying pressure. That is exactly what happened at the meeting in London. And that is why a joint statement was adopted by the countries of Northern Europe and the Baltics. And I hope that today a strong signal will be sent that Europe supports Ukraine. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz initiated online talks on August 13th, 2 days before the Trump-Putin summit, with the participation of the presidents of the US and Ukraine, as well as European leaders. This was reported by the German government. It is expected that, in addition to Merz, Presidents Trump and Zelensky, the leaders of the United Kingdom, Italy, Poland, Finland and France will also take part in the conversation, as well as the heads of the European Commission, the EU Council, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte and US Vice President J.D. Vance. The agenda includes pressure on Russia, security issues and preparations for negotiations with Putin.
The world should have spoken to him more firmly, and he should not have been allowed out of isolation at all. But since the current situation has developed in such a significant and impactful way that this crucial meeting with him is now taking place, there must naturally be a truly united and absolutely unified position, according to which the United States, in general, should unequivocally speak and firmly adhere to the very same consistent position as both Ukraine and the entirety of Europe. That is what was clearly and explicitly declared.
On August 11th, US President Donald Trump stated at a press conference that he would demand that Putin end the aggressive war against Ukraine. The head of the White House emphasized that it would take him just 2 minutes to understand the motives of the Kremlin dictator. According to Trump, the summit in Alaska is a trial meeting, and afterwards there should be negotiations between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Putin, or a trilateral summit involving President Trump. Nikita Skoblikov for Freedom TV channel.
The upcoming Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska is already making headlines and raising eyebrows. The White House has labeled it a listening exercise likely to lower expectations, even though earlier talks hinted at possible progress toward ending the war in Ukraine. Now it's confirmed that two leaders will meet at Elmendorf Richardson military base in Anchorage. Why Alaska, and what does this location choice reveal about the high-stakes negotiation?
It is here that the first meeting between Trump and Putin since 2021 will take place. The joint military base Elmendorf Richardson in Anchorage is a restricted facility, and Alaska itself is an extremely convenient location for the Russian dictator. The United States is not a party to the Rome Statute. Therefore, on this territory, Putin is not at risk of being arrested under the warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children, which is still in effect. While the details of the meeting are still being finalized, the White House has stated that Trump and Putin will speak one-on-one. This upcoming meeting has already been described there as a listening exercise for the American president, thereby lowering expectations for significant progress in ceasefire negotiations.
I think this is a listening exercise for the president. Only one party involved in this war will be present at the meeting. So the president needs to go and once again gain a clearer and better understanding of how we can, hopefully, bring this war to an end.
At the same time, John Bolton, former national security advisor to Trump during his first term, believes that Putin will be receptive to Trump's proposals at the meeting, as he hopes to make cosmetic concessions and sway the U.S. president to his side. Bolton emphasizes that, unlike the Russian president, the American president views politics as something personal.
Everything depends on his personal relationships with other heads of state, and Trump has stated this publicly. Of course, personal relationships matter in foreign policy, just as they do in everything else. But when you are one of the toughest leaders in the world, like Vladimir Putin, it's not a matter of emotions, but of cold calculation. Trump doesn't understand this.
According to John Bolton, the head of the White House mostly relies on his instincts as a businessman. Can he make a deal? Trump himself has also spoken about this.
At the end of this meeting, probably within the first 2 minutes, I will know for sure whether a deal can be made.
Neither the president of Ukraine, whose country the negotiations directly concern, nor European leaders were invited by Trump to participate in the meeting. However, he promises to later organize a meeting between Zelensky and Putin, either with his participation or without. And immediately after the negotiations on Friday, he will hold talks with the Europeans and Zelensky.
I will meet with President Putin and we will see what he has in mind. And if it's an honest deal, I will inform the leaders of the European Union and NATO, as well as President Zelensky, about it. I think out of respect I will call him first, and then them. And I can say, I wish you success, keep fighting. Or I can say that we can reach an agreement.
Trump continues to insist that he envisions some kind of territorial swap in the future, where certain territories should be returned to Ukraine, but others will have to be sacrificed. There are two circumstances here. First, none of the sources among the negotiators give even a hint that Putin is planning to give up any occupied Ukrainian territories. On the contrary, he wants Ukraine to hand over the entire Donbas to him without a fight. Second, Zelensky refused to make any territorial concessions to the occupier, arguing not just with his emotions but with the constitution, which does not allow for such trades. And this seriously irritates Trump.
I was a bit taken aback by what Zelensky said. Well, I need to get constitutional approval. So he has approval to go to war, to kill everyone, but he needs permission to exchange territories because there will be some kind of territorial exchange. I know this from Russia and from conversations with everyone. For the good of Ukraine, there are good things, not bad, but also things that are bad for both sides.
Assessing the chances of how productive their meeting with Putin would be, Trump said, "I think it's going to be good, but it could be bad." Katerina Fedorchenko, Olga Koshelenko, TSN 1+1. Marathon, the only news.
From Trump's tariffs on China, which could backfire on the US itself, to the escalating economic spat between Russia and Belarus, the mounting oil and cement crisis inside Russia, and the looming collapse of the Russian economy. Why could this economic downfall ripple far beyond Russia's borders? And who will feel the shockwaves first?
An economic conflict is brewing between Russia and Belarus, all because of cement. This was reported by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. The reason for the market oversaturation is Belarusian cement, which, along with supplies from Kazakhstan, Iran, China, and Vietnam, is pushing products from the Russian Federation out of the local market. The largest Russian producer, Siemros, is reducing the work week starting October 1st due to declining sales. And to protect local manufacturers, there are proposals in Russia to introduce 5-year anti-dumping duties and import restrictions.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has postponed the increase of tariffs on Chinese goods for another 90 days. This happened just a few hours before the so-called tariff truce was set to expire. This was reported by the American TV channel CNBC. The oil market reacted to the extension of the agreement. Global prices are rising. Reuters reports this. Investors hope that a trade blockade can be avoided and that the markets will not see a drop in fuel demand. However, the upcoming meeting between Trump and Putin regarding Ukraine could change this situation.
We are now joined by Ihor Burakovsky. He is the chairman of the board at the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting. Greetings to you, Mr. Ihor. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So the tariff truce has been extended. And honestly, it feels like, well, it really seemed that this was how it was supposed to be. And for now, tariffs, or rather the introduction of duties, is being delayed. Well, let's see how things develop on the political stage, and then we'll move on to the economy. So what are the actual economic risks here, specifically because Trump is continuing the tariff truce with China? Who stands to gain from this?
I think that, in fact, both sides are currently trying to clarify their own positions. And the relationship between China and the United States is a matter of bilateral relations in their purest form. It's clear that Trump is looking at a broader perspective. How tariff instruments, tariff restrictions, and tariff wars work with other countries. It's also clear that he is taking into account, so to speak, the possible relationship between China and the Russian Federation. And besides, let's be honest, this kind of mass application of tariffs is bad for China. But on the other hand, it also has certain consequences for the American economy. Because American exporters whom Trump is now, let's say, trying to keep within the country are interested in the American, Chinese, and not only Chinese markets. So, this is a very multi-layered and highly multidimensional structure.
Mr. Burakovsky, we are particularly interested in what is happening in the oil market, because in particular, after it became known that the US is postponing tariffs for China, the oil market reacted calmly with a slight decrease. What are the current trends? Is there reason to expect that Russia will have less revenue from oil sales because, quite simply, oil will cost less in the near future?
Well, the situation on the oil market is as follows. It is quite a significant player in this market. But the largest market today is the so-called OPEC Plus organization, that is the OPEC member countries plus those that, so to speak, are not formally OPEC members, but to some extent try to coordinate their efforts with the OPEC countries. Recently, as far as I remember, OPEC countries, taking into account the general trend of declining oil prices, in the medium term, we are seeing a decrease in oil prices, although there may be some fluctuations up and down, and this is due to several factors. The first factor is that as of today, there is a certain slowdown in economic development in the world, including in China. In other words, less oil is needed, and countries, in order to compensate for this decrease in demand, are trying to export more oil. And then comes a very simple question. The winner is the one with the lowest oil production cost. They can lower their prices. Obviously, everyone tries to adapt to this. When it comes to the Russian Federation, there are, so to speak, three very simple factors. The first factor is how long Russia can trade and continue trading at low prices, considering that their production costs are quite high compared to many OPEC countries. The second question is under what conditions will this oil be supplied and, so to speak, at what price? And the third question is how interested Russian Federation oil exporters are in bringing foreign currency back into Russia. They are trying not to do this today. And these, so to speak, are the three systems, you could say, that determine the situation on the Russian oil market.
And let's also talk about the so-called cement market. The information I mentioned earlier, that an economic conflict is brewing in Russia, specifically with Belarus, because there are other suppliers there and the Russians are even forced to reduce the number of working days and the amount of production material simply because there is basically nowhere to put it. What percentage of the market is this, and is there really something here that could harm the Russian economy?
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you found this update valuable, like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts and share it so more people can stay informed. Your engagements help us fight in Russia propaganda and bring you the truth. If you want to support our work directly, consider becoming a channel sponsor. Every contribution helps us keep reporting, verify information from the ground and give a voice to Ukraine. Stay strong, stay informed and stay with Ukraine.